Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and something I feel that needs to be said at this point, and a lot of people have considered me to be an evidence-based practitioner or an evidence-based influencer, but the fact of the matter is, I can say as someone who has observed the history of lifting and training and who has coached for many years, who has decades of experience around this, and who has kept up with all the scientific literature for well over a decade, right? That training is more art than it is science, because let's be realistic here. Most of what we do as coaches and observing people, there's an enormous psychological component to all of this, right? In other words, it's not about what's particularly optimal always for the body. It's oftentimes what's optimal for the mind of your individual lifter or client. And it's not the case of, you just got to find what works for you. No. I mean, different methods will absolutely work for the same person. The same method will work for the majority of your clients oftentimes too. Okay, that's not how it is. It's understanding what's going on and why. And here's the issue with being purely evidence-based. And I even had a follower chime in the other day and said, he goes, I'm a physician and I find the entire idea of evidence-based as a term for fitness to be hilarious, right? Because he has a real evidence-based practice, has to go to medical school, clinical trials, all this stuff, long-term population studies, studying 5,000 people and the effects of a medication over 5 or 10 years. We don't have any of that in the sports science world. We don't have any of that. That doesn't exist. That's not even on the radar. Okay? And here's the issue we have, that even when we look at a lot of the best science, here's the problem. This is not a case of where the layman is looking at big science as portrayed in the media and going, they always change their mind. That's not the same thing, because you're talking about different stuff, and sometimes their conclusions are not different, meaning it's just some minor deviations or a single study released. Meta-analysis tend to be pretty decent, right? It's the case of an exercise science. You will have the leading experts in the world will take a set of variables in exercise or lifting, okay, and they'll stake their whole reputation on it. And then you will have a set of studies come out 5 years later that are in such enormous conflict, absolutely enormous conflict, that it makes what these people were saying 5 years ago sound ludicrous if we went purely off the science. But here's the thing. Their clients and people following the other stuff got results. Okay? And that's what's the crazy part. Okay, they got results. Think about that for a moment. But then a newer set of studies comes out with something, as far as exercise science go, I mean, it is vastly different. Like, we've literally had studies that were showing, in some cases, going beyond about 10 to 12 sets per week caused less muscle growth for a muscle. Okay, I want to be clear on that. A lot of people were definitely saying 10 to 20 sets, which works really well. Then you've got the same experts are now getting behind studies talking about 50 or 60 sets a week, saying, no, we think it causes more muscle growth. Okay. Do you guys see the problem there? That is how conflicting it is. I mean, vastly different extremes. It suddenly becomes evidence-based that are in enormous conflict. But here's the problem. The ones from the other previous one worked just fine. Okay? That's the issue. This is not a science-based thing. And here's the other problem. We don't even have the tools. It's something I've said before. We do not have the funding or the tools to even properly measure these variables. It's a crapshoot. The research tends to be biased, extremely small sample sizes, very short periods of time. Oftentimes, the demographics being studied are not appropriate for our advice for anyone outside of the novice phase. Okay? we have better anecdote to follow than we do this. And again, we have to be clear is that there's a continual changing and conflict. It is literally the case where the best researchers and experts in the field have vastly conflicting opinions, so much so that you can't follow both because your training philosophies would be completely incompatible. Because one of them is literally telling you the number 5 and the other is telling you the number 30. And you can't really do both. That's the problem. So think of it that way. So what do we come back down to? Experience, art, finding what works for your clients. And here's one of the things I've noticed too. As a coach, the mindset of a client and how they're feeling and what they're doing is oftentimes more important than finding what's optimal, because I need to keep them consistent. I need to keep them motivated. I need to keep them uninjured. And there's a lot of patterns that you find when you coach people that you realize a lot of times results are a case of the way someone's psychologically doing. It's almost a case of their brain wiring and brain chemistry is more important in many cases than some of the physical variables. Because you have to keep them consistent, you have to keep them motivated. And some of the things that I found is stuff that we know for a fact works. Absolutely 100% works consistently. Some of your clients will get demotivated doing it. And then they'll just quit doing that part and then they won't get results. And that's true for all of us. You know, when people say stuff like, well, you just got to want it bad and you got to be motivated. Well, is that going to work for you for the next 20 years? You know, that's for most people, that might not be true. So the whole point here is that there is an art form to training. There's an art form to training because the science is so vastly inconclusive because we do not have the funding or the tools to even really properly measure this stuff. And when people are drawing these conclusions, again, I've watched the same experts who have advanced degrees in it contradict themselves massively, multiple times, because they're trying to follow the newest studies. And literally their old advice and studies that they criticize for being flat wrong, they're then shifting over to that stance, and then they'll go back the other direction. It's continually evolving. And it's continually conflicting. This is not an area of science that we really have a good grasp on. It just isn't. The funding isn't there. The research isn't there. Okay, the resources are not there to make it a good science yet. So until then, it is art form and psychology more than anything else. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. Hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.